17 a.m. At 60, Sola Sobowale is imagined opening her eyes in the darkness, not because of applause, a director calling her name, or another demanding scene waiting beneath the lights, but because her body seems to be sending signals she can no longer ignore. What happens when a woman whose strength once seemed powerful enough to dominate an entire screen suddenly discovers that the greatest battle may be taking place inside her own body? In this hypothetical story, age-related illness has begun to weigh heavily on Sola, while the darkest fear of all, cancer, hangs over the family like a shadow. This is not a claim that Sola Sobowale has actually been diagnosed with cancer or terminal cancer. Rather, it is an imagined exploration of what such a devastating possibility could mean for a woman entering her 60s and for the people closest to her. At first, the changes seem almost ordinary. She wakes more slowly. Long working days leave exhaustion that does not disappear after one night's sleep. Her steps after hours on set feel heavier, and sometimes she pauses in front of a mirror just a little longer, studying a face that has carried decades of triumph, pressure, sacrifice, and responsibility. But in the silence of 2:17 a.m., every small discomfort can suddenly feel larger. A persistent ache becomes a question. Unusual fatigue becomes a fear. And the word cancer, even when it exists only as a terrifying possibility in this imagined scenario, is enough to change the atmosphere of an entire home. Oludotun Sobowale and the family are imagined watching closely, trying not to reveal how frightened they are. Perhaps someone asks, "Are you feeling better today?" while already fearing the answer. Perhaps a meal grows cold because nobody at the table truly has an appetite. Sola, meanwhile, is imagined doing what strong people so often do, continuing forward while hiding how vulnerable she feels. On screen, audiences remember the commanding voice, the fierce expression, the woman who can fill a room simply by entering it. Behind closed doors in this hypothetical story, however, there is no script telling her what happens next. If doctors were ever to utter the words advanced cancer, what would happen to that strength? Would she cry immediately, or would she remain completely still? Would Oludotun reach for her hand before realizing his own fingers were trembling? Would the family begin measuring time differently, not in years or birthdays, but in appointments, test results, quiet mornings and nights when everyone listens for movement from the next room? The imagined pain is not merely physical. It is the feeling of betrayal when a body that carried you through decades suddenly seems unfamiliar. It is the fear of losing ordinary things that once appeared permanent. Walking through the front door, laughing around a table, preparing for another performance, hearing family members argue over something insignificant. And then, the pace slows. 2:31 a.m. The house is still dark. In this imagined scene, Sola sits on the edge of the bed while everyone else appears to be asleep. On a nearby table lies an old photograph of her younger self, smiling without knowing what 60 would feel like. She reaches toward it, stops before touching the frame, and somewhere beyond the curtains, the first faint trace of morning begins to appear. Before 60 arrived, there had been years when Sola Sobowale seemed almost unstoppable, a woman whose presence could turn an ordinary scene into something audiences remembered long after the screen went dark. Go back through the timeline, beyond the image of an older actress confronting the natural limits of age, and there is a younger Sola stepping into Nigeria's entertainment industry with ambition, uncertainty, and the determination to survive in a profession that rarely promises stability. Year after year, performance became more than work. It demanded long days, repeated takes, travel, waiting, emotional transformation, and the strange discipline of appearing powerful even when exhaustion followed her home. As her career expanded, audiences increasingly associated Sola with formidable women, characters who could command a family, challenge an enemy, explode with anger, and then expose vulnerability within seconds. That strength became part of her public image, but the human body does not recognize fame as protection. Time continued quietly behind every performance. Another production ended. Another journey began. Another birthday passed. The woman who could dominate a film set still needed rest when the cameras stopped. Sola has spoken publicly about paying greater attention to healthy living as she has grown older, including the importance of eating well, exercising, and getting enough sleep. Those habits tell a more grounded story about aging, not necessarily one of diagnosed old-age diseases, but of recognizing that the body requires different care after decades of relentless activity. A late night that once seemed manageable may demand more recovery. Hours of standing, traveling, or performing can feel different from how they did 20 years earlier. None of these changes by themselves prove serious illness, and without verified medical records, they should never be turned into a diagnosis. Yet they create a powerful contrast. The younger Sola could look toward tomorrow and believe sheer determination might carry her through almost anything. The older woman understands that determination has limits. Imagine her finishing another exhausting day, removing the costume and makeup, and suddenly seeing not the larger-than-life character audiences know, but simply herself in the mirror. For a few seconds there is no applause, no dialogue, no director calling for another take, only breathing, silence, and the evidence of passing years. Her family may know the difference between the public Sola and the private woman who becomes tired, needs sleep, and sometimes needs others to care for her. Oludotun, in this imagined narrative, notices those quieter moments too. Perhaps he remembers the younger woman who seemed capable of carrying everything herself, and realizes that time has gradually rewritten the rules. But taking care of yourself does not mean you can control everything happening inside your body. And that is where the darker possibility introduced earlier begins to return. Not a confirmed diagnosis, not proof of terminal cancer. Just the frightening question no amount of success can silence. Late one evening, Sola is imagined walking past an old photograph from decades earlier. She stops. The young woman in the picture appears ready to challenge the entire world. Sola looks at her for several seconds, then slowly places one hand against her own chest as the room becomes silent. 10 p.m. The working day is almost over, but something about the silence feels heavier than the hours that came before it. By the time people reach 60, they may begin listening to their bodies differently, not necessarily because something is wrong, but because age makes ordinary changes harder to dismiss without a second thought. This is where Sola Sobowale's story becomes less about the powerful woman audiences recognize and more about a universal fear shared by millions of people growing older. There is no need to invent symptoms, no medical diagnosis to place in her hands, no hospital corridor waiting at the end of the scene. Imagine instead something much simpler. Sola has just completed another demanding day of work. Voices fill the dressing room for a few minutes. Assistants gathering clothes, someone laughing near the doorway, footsteps disappearing into the corridor. Then one person leaves. Another says goodnight. A light is switched off. Then another. Within minutes, the room that had been alive with movement becomes almost completely still. Sola remains in front of the mirror. The makeup that helped create a character is slowly removed, layer by layer, and the woman looking back at her is no longer protected by costume, dialogue, or camera angles. She is simply a woman approaching another stage of life. Perhaps that is what makes aging unsettling. It rarely announces itself with dramatic music. It appears through birthdays, photographs, and the realization that recovery, energy, and endurance can change over time. None of this means Sola has a particular illness. These are universal realities of aging, not evidence of cancer or any specific disease. Yet once a person becomes more conscious of time, even silence can provoke questions. How many demanding roles can the body continue to carry? How much rest will tomorrow require? What happens when determination is no longer enough to make the body respond exactly as it once did? For decades, professional challenges could be answered with preparation, courage, and another take. Time offers no second take. That may be the cruelest contrast of all. A performer can defeat rejection, survive criticism, and return after disappointment, but nobody negotiates forever with age. 42 p.m. In this imagined scene, the final dressing room light remains above the mirror. Sola looks at photographs tucked into its corner, faces from different years, different productions, different versions of herself. Somewhere outside, her family is waiting for the woman they know beyond the screen, while Oludotun, in this hypothetical narrative, represents the quiet fear of someone watching a loved one grow older and realizing he cannot protect her from everything. Sola rises, reaches for her belongings, then looks into the mirror one final time. The last light clicks off. For several seconds, her reflection remains faintly visible in the dark glass, and the empty chair behind her seems to be waiting for another day. 30 a.m. Let us make one assumption. What if one day, Sola Sobowale were sitting across from a doctor and suddenly heard the word cancer? This is a hypothetical scenario, not a claim that Sola has received such a diagnosis, and no specific cancer, stage, treatment, or prognosis should be attached to her without verified medical information. But imagine the emotional weight of that single moment. The most frightening sound might not be crying. It might be the few seconds of absolute silence immediately after the doctor finishes speaking. A clock continues ticking somewhere on the wall. Papers remain motionless on the desk. Outside the room, people continue walking, talking, and answering their phones as though nothing has changed. Yet for the person sitting inside, the world has suddenly divided into two parts: life before hearing that word, and everything that may come after it. In this imagined moment, Sola does not immediately think about movie sets, famous characters, awards, or the applause accumulated across decades. Those things that once appeared enormous suddenly feel strangely distant. The questions become smaller, simpler, and therefore more painful. What do I tell my family? What will tomorrow look like? Who will be frightened when I walk through the door? How do you look at the people you love after receiving news you know could frighten them too? Perhaps Sola remains silent, her hands resting together, while memories arrive without permission. A crowded set from years earlier, laughter at home, family celebrations, ordinary meals nobody thought important enough to remember. And then the perspective changes. Because a serious illness never enters the life of only one person. Emotionally, it can enter an entire household. In this hypothetical story, Oludotun hears the news and for several seconds cannot find the right words. The instinct may be to say, "We will face this together," yet beneath those words could be a fear he does not want Sola to see. Other loved ones might react differently. One asks questions, another becomes unusually quiet. Someone tries to remain practical because breaking down feels like a luxury the family cannot yet afford. Suddenly, calendars could feel different. Conversations could feel different. Even breakfast the next morning might carry an unfamiliar weight because everyone knows something they did not know yesterday. 18 p.m. Imagine the family gathered in one room after the first shock has passed. Nobody is discussing fame. Nobody cares about box office numbers or the next production. Sola sits among the people who know her without makeup, costumes, or cameras. Someone reaches across the table and quietly takes her hand. No dramatic promise is made. No one knows what comes next. On the wall hangs a family photograph taken during a happier, ordinary day, and for a long moment, everyone seems to be looking at it without saying why. 10 p.m. When the cameras stop following Sola Sobowale, another story begins. The quieter story of the person who has shared a life beyond the applause. Over the years, Sola has spoken warmly about her husband, describing him as loving, caring, and supportive of her career. That detail matters here because behind a performer who spends decades moving between sets, characters, and demanding schedules, there is often another person experiencing those years from a completely different angle. While audiences see premieres, performances, and unforgettable roles, family life is measured in departures and returns, missed hours, telephone calls, ordinary meals, and the effort required to keep a home emotionally steady while one partner's career pulls them repeatedly into the public world. Now place that history inside our hypothetical scenario. If Sola's health were ever seriously threatened, what would it mean for the husband who had watched her build that extraordinary career? This is not a claim that he has faced Sola's terminal cancer or that such a diagnosis exists. The emotional question is simpler and more universal. How does someone confront the possibility that the person beside them for so many years may suddenly become vulnerable in a way love cannot simply repair? Imagine a quiet room with two chairs standing next to each other. Nothing dramatic happens. On a nearby shelf sits an old family photograph, its edges slightly worn by time. In it, everyone is younger. There were still years ahead that nobody had lived yet. Productions Sola had not filmed, journeys the family had not taken, birthdays that had not arrived. One person would leave home for work. The other would help preserve the stability to which she could return. Years accumulated almost invisibly until those ordinary routines became a marriage's history. And perhaps that is why the possibility of serious illness can feel so cruel. It does not threaten only the future. It forces people to look backward and suddenly understand the value of everything they once considered routine. The empty hours waiting for someone to return home. The familiar sound of footsteps. A conversation repeated hundreds of times. Two people sitting together without needing to speak. At 60, Sola may still appear to audiences as the formidable performer who can command a screen with a glance, but inside this imagined crisis, fame cannot protect the people who love her from fear. Her husband would not be watching a character confront danger. He would be watching his life partner face uncertainty, while knowing that support sometimes means remaining present even when there is nothing one can fix. 11:47 p.m. The house has grown quiet. The old photograph remains on the table. Beside it are those two chairs, still close together. One is slightly pulled back, as though someone had just stood up and might return at any moment, while the other remains facing the darkened window. 12:30 p.m. There comes a moment in many families when children begin looking at their parents differently, not because love has changed, but because time has. Sola Sobowale has previously spoken about a period of her life connected to the United Kingdom and the sacrifices surrounding the care and future of her children. Behind the actress audiences celebrated was also a mother making decisions that could affect where her children lived, how they were raised, and what opportunities might be waiting for them. That history creates a painful emotional paradox in this hypothetical story. The woman who once reorganized parts of her own life around protecting her children eventually reaches an age when those same children may begin wondering how they can protect her. When parents reach 60, the children they once protected begin to realize that there may come days when those roles have to reverse. It rarely happens in one dramatic moment. There does not need to be a frightening telephone call or a hospital corridor. Sometimes the realization arrives through something much quieter. Noticing that your mother is getting older in family photographs, asking whether she has rested enough, wanting her to slow down after a demanding schedule, or simply understanding that the person who once appeared indestructible is human. In our imagined scenario of a serious health crisis, that realization would become even sharper. Not because death has occurred, it has not. And not because any terminal diagnosis is being claimed, but because the possibility of losing someone can suddenly make ordinary memories feel unbearably precious. Imagine Sola's children looking through an old family album. One photograph captures a mother still consumed by responsibility, perhaps during years when her children could not yet understand how many decisions she was making for them. Another shows everyone older. Between those pictures are years that no camera completely recorded. Worries hidden from children, work accepted or rejected, journeys, separations, reunions, school days, birthdays, and countless ordinary evenings. Fame could give their mother recognition, but it could never guarantee that time would leave her untouched. And if her health ever truly changed, her children might confront one of adulthood's most difficult truths. Growing older means discovering that the people who taught you to feel safe may eventually need that same reassurance from you. 2:26 p.m. In this imagined scene, there are no cameras in the room. A family photograph lies open on the table. Sola is smiling in the center, surrounded by the children she once worried about protecting. Years later, someone gently runs a finger across that photograph, stops over their mother's face, and leaves the album open as afternoon light slowly moves across the page. 15. Imagine Sola Sobowale sitting alone as an old recording begins to play. On the screen is a younger Sola, moving quickly across a film set, laughing between scenes, throwing herself into a performance with the explosive energy that would eventually become part of her identity. The room in the recording is noisy. People are calling instructions, cameras are moving, and somewhere beyond the frame another scene is waiting to begin. Then look away from that screen and toward the woman watching it at 60. The contrast is not about beauty. It is not about wrinkles, gray hair, or trying to recover youth. It is about something far more unsettling. Time. At 20, 30, or 40, tomorrow can feel almost unlimited. At 60, the question becomes harder to ignore. How much healthy time do any of us really have left? No award can answer it. No famous role can stop the clock long enough to provide certainty. Sola's younger image continues moving across the screen, unaware of everything the older woman will eventually experience. There were careers to build, children to protect, family responsibilities to carry, and years of pressure hidden behind public success. Yet this is where our hypothetical story reaches its emotional peak. If that disease ever appeared in her life, the real battle would probably exist not only inside her body, but also inside the fear carried by everyone who loves her. Cancer remains a hypothetical possibility here, not a confirmed diagnosis. The deeper subject is mortality itself. Imagine her husband looking at the same footage and recognizing the woman with whom he built decades of memories. Imagine her children seeing not a Nollywood icon, but their mother, the person who once stood between them and the uncertainties of the world. Suddenly, the old videos become more than entertainment. Every laugh preserved by a camera feels valuable because it belongs to a moment that can never happen in exactly the same way again. 16:48. The footage stops. The screen freezes on Sola's younger face, caught in the middle of a smile. For several seconds, present and past seem to occupy the same room. The powerful woman audiences know is still there, but so is the ordinary human truth beneath that image. Even the strongest people are given no guarantee that strength will remain unchanged forever. Perhaps this is what makes 60 frightening, not the number itself, but the realization that the body, career, and family have all been traveling through time together. 17:27. The room grows darker. Sola's younger face remains frozen on the television. In the black reflection surrounding it, the silhouette of the older woman can just barely be seen, watching the person she used to be while the clock continues moving behind her. 11:48 p.m. The day has finally ended. There is no emergency room, no oxygen mask, no doctor standing beneath cold lights with a countdown, and no claim that Sola Sobowale is living with terminal cancer or approaching death. There is only a quiet room after another long day of filming. The costumes have been returned to their hangars. A script lies half-closed on the table, several pages still carrying the marks of a working actress. One by one, the lights have been switched off until a faint glow from somewhere outside falls across the dressing room mirror. For hours, that mirror reflected a performer becoming someone else. Perhaps it watched makeup transform her face, costumes change her silhouette, and concentration turn into the commanding presence audiences associate with King of Boys. But now the character has disappeared. No intimidating stare, no dramatic dialogue, no crowd waiting for the next scene. Only the reflection of a woman who has reached 60 and who, like every human being, must live with the knowledge that the body changes even when the spirit still wants to move at yesterday's speed. Somewhere behind her sits an old family photograph. In this imagined frame are years that cannot be replayed. Her husband, her children, familiar smiles, celebrations, and ordinary moments that probably seemed insignificant when they happened. Yet tonight, those ordinary memories feel heavier than trophies. Her career occupies one corner of her life, family occupies another. Between them stretches everything time has quietly taken forward. We do not know how many healthy years remain for anyone. We cannot say what illness may or may not appear in Sola's future, and aging itself should never be rewritten as a diagnosis. Perhaps that uncertainty is precisely why this room feels so different now. At 20, a mirror can seem like a place to prepare for tomorrow. At 60, it can also become a place where yesterday unexpectedly returns. Sola is imagined sitting before it without speaking. Her younger self seems almost present in the photographs and memories surrounding her, the ambitious woman beginning her journey, the mother making sacrifices, the actress walking onto sets. The performer audiences would eventually recognize almost instantly. All those versions of her have arrived here together. The imaginary camera begins moving backward, slowly leaving Sola, the script and the family photograph inside an increasingly distant frame. And one question remains. After all the roles Sola Sobowale has conquered on screen, could there be any role more difficult than learning to live with the changes in her own body? 11:49 p.m. The final light disappears. The chair remains in front of the mirror. For another second, a faint reflection is still visible in the glass, then it slowly dissolves into darkness.